Okay, guys, I read The Shining a few weeks ago, and I thought I would watch the movie and kind of tell you some of the differences. So, if you have not seen the movie The Shining, you should definitely go see The Shining before you watch this. And if you want to read the book, I highly recommend it, and maybe, read it before, but that's up to you. But let's get going. This is super minor, but I'm pretty sure their Volkswagen Beetle in the book was purple. And I only remember that because Danny had like a little model car that was like their Volkswagen that was purple.
What about Tony? He's looking forward to the hotel, I bet.
I don't want to go there, Mrs. Torrance.
Well, how come you don't want to go?
I just don't.
Yeah, this is not exactly the way they do it in the book. I mean, in the book, they think of Tony as his imaginary friend. They don't really like talking about Tony because it creeps them out, and it's certainly not this weird little finger thing Danny does. I get that as a device to show what's going on, and to get the parents sort of familiar that there's something going on with Danny. They do this, but it's not anything like that in the book when it comes to Tony. Also, I will have to say, this book relies heavily on first-person point of view, and it switches between Jack and Danny and Wendy, and so because of that, I feel like you're already getting some weird stuff that Danny says that isn't necessarily landing because we don't hear his thoughts like we do in the book.
Bill, I'd like you to meet Jack Torrance.
How do you do?
Bill, how do you do?
Nice to meet you.
Pleasure to meet you.
Well, this ought to be quite a change for you.
Well, I'm looking for a change. Our people in Denver recommended Jack very highly, and for once, I agree with them.
So, Watson and Ullman here, the way that they're described in the book, you could almost swap the actors because Ullman is like this little guy. He's kind of a prick. He's Napoleon-like, he lets everyone know he's in charge and makes everyone feel like they're dumber than him. Jack really dislikes him a lot, and it kind of more of that sort of happens later on in the book too. And Watson is kind of like a good old boy. He's like this guy who takes care of all the stuff around the hotel. So it seems like these characters are very different than they are in the book.
Running the boiler, heating different parts of the hotel on a daily rotating basis, repairing damage as it occurs, and doing repairs so that the elements can't get a foothold.
This is all like weirdly accurate to kind of like the nuts and bolts of what he has to do from the book. So it's kind of funny.
How about your wife and son? How do you think they'll take to it?
They'll love it.
Great.
They will not love it.
But at some point during the winter, he must have suffered some kind of a complete mental breakdown. He ran amok and killed his family with an axe.
So in the book, Ullman really doesn't like Jack and really doesn't want Jack to be the caretaker. He thinks that it's better suited for a kid right out of college, somebody who doesn't have a family. A big part of that kind of is because of the story about Grady. Once again, it would have been weird for Kubrick to have them not liking one another because you can't really hear Jack's thoughts. Also, by this point already in the book, you just don't like Jack because he spent a lot of time in his head, and even before he goes crazy, he's just really an unlikable guy in like a lot of ways.
Tony, why don't you want to go to the hotel? I don't know. You do too know. Now come on, tell me.
Now hold your eyes still so I can see.
So that was really cool. All that stuff's iconic. Now, in the book, Danny is sitting outside waiting for his dad to come home, and he is gone into some sort of state where he's trying to talk to Tony. And Tony shows him the Overlook with a skull and crossbones over it, I believe on fire. And also, what's really interesting is, Danny's only like 5 years old in this, and so he can't really read yet. And so Tony keeps on pointing out signs to him, and he can't read them. And so part of the book is like Danny really trying to fast forwarding his reading abilities so he can understand what Tony's trying to show him. But that was a really cool way of showcasing practically the same thing, just, in Kubrick's own way.
Is Tony one of your animals?
No, he's a little bit that lives in my mouth.
Tony's his imaginary friend.
Oh.
So in the book, he talks about Tony as this boy he knows, and he sees Tony often from a distance, and he sees him as like an older boy, like a few years older than him. He doesn't talk about him like as something in his mouth or anything like that, like this. Also, there is sort of this running theme of doctors checking up on Danny because he is having these seizures, and they're often like wondering if he has schizophrenia, essentially, is what they're concerned about with the Tony. And that's sort of what they're leading at here. Now keep in mind, in the book, we already know he's having these visions, and we already know that he can read minds. In the book, we already kind of know that at this point.
Shall we go into the living room? Yes.
Also, this is super minor, but like Wendy is completely different from Shelley Duvall in the book. She's blonde. She's just everything about her is described differently than Shelley Duvall.
What sort of injury did he have?
He dislocated his shoulder. My husband had been drinking. Danny had scattered some of his school papers all over the room, and my husband grabbed his arm, to pull him away from him, and he injured Danny's arm. Something good did come out of it all because he said, Wendy, I'm never going to touch another drop. And if I do, you can leave me.
Yeah, so this is pretty much, in a way, kind of what happened in the book. I mean, in the book, first off, he broke his arm. He didn't dislocate his shoulder, so it was a lot worse. Second off, he continued drinking afterwards. There was actually another episode where he and his drunk friend were driving around, and they thought maybe they ran over a kid. And that's when he stopped drinking. But, for the sake of, like, brevity, it's all pretty much the same.
Dad,
Yes?
I'm hungry.
Well, you should have eaten your breakfast.
Hey, wasn't it around here that the Donner Party got snowbound?
She does. Wendy does bring up the Donner Party a few times in the book. She's, like, really concerned about being up there. Also, what I like about this scene is, you wonder why Jack is so grumpy kind of while he's driving. And, once again, in the book, like, it's just this endless inner monologue from this character who, like, despises his wife, who just wants to drink. He's very about how great he is and how everyone's kind of against him. I mean, he sucks. And so you kind of get this idea that this is like restless person who's not very kind. And so I think, like, in a way, Nicholson's sort of portraying that without us, like, hearing it.
Oh, this whole place has had an illustrious past. We had 4 presidents who stayed here. Lots of movie stars.
Yeah, I think, once again, it's really cool that, Kubrick just kind of puts in some of this exposition that was from the book pretty much directly in the script. I mean, that was kind of a thing about the Overlook. There was like 4 presidents, and there was a bunch of like celebrities. I don't recall there being a games room per se. I know they talked a lot about the playground, but I don't remember the scene where Danny plays darts in the book. Okay, so one of the cool things about the book, like the movie, is Danny does see a lot of ghosts quite often. Sadly, the little girls really aren't like a big part of the book. They don't really show up, especially not to the frequency that they show up in this movie. I mean, they're iconic, and they were the right move, because how many creepy little girls did we see in horror movies after this movie? But alas, they don't really show up in the book.
This is our famous Hedge Maze. It's quite an attraction around here.
Okay, this is a big one. I think a lot of people know this one already, but there is no Hedge Maze in the book. It is a bunch of topiaries. There's 2 lions, there's a rabbit, there's a dog. Not really that exciting when you're shooting a movie. But I will say, if they were to make the movie now, they might actually go for the topiaries, because the topiary animals become animated. They sort of become alive and sort of attack people in the book, and it's really cool in some ways, but certainly not within the realm of possibility for this time period in filmmaking. And also, I think it would have been a little too far. But I think today, if they made this movie, they probably have some CG topiary animals running around.
That's our snowcat.
Snowcat's dope. They do not have that in the book. They have a snowmobile.
Well, this is our gold ballroom.
I don't remember it being called the Gold Room. I think it was just called the Ballroom, but I'm not totally sure.
We always remove all the booze from the premises when we shut down. That reduces the insurance we normally have to carry.
Yeah, that's a big part of the book. It's for different reasons. I believe they say just the staff takes it all. It doesn't have anything to do with insurance. But you got to keep in mind, when you're reading the book, at this point, you're already within this situation where Jack is like a super alcoholic. Well, all he wants to do is drink all the time, and he's talking about it in his head constantly. And so when they get there and they talk about booze not being there, it's another thing for the audience to be like, well, okay, this is going to drive him even crazier, but probably a good thing because he's an alcoholic and a madman.
Mrs. Torrance, your husband introduced you as Winifred. Now, are you a Winnie or a Freddie?
I'm a Wendy.
Oh, Wendy, that's nice. That's the prettiest.
It's fun. That dialogue is straight from the book. I mean, maybe a few words different, but I remember that moment.
Well, I think we can manage that too, Doc.
Mr. Halloran. How'd you know we call him Doc?
Beg pardon?
Doc. You called Danny Doc twice just now.
Yeah, so this is from the book. Basically, they both have telepathy, and they've already sort of like talked to one another in the book, and that exchange happens. I think that Jack might have been also in the scene in the book, but yeah, that exchange where they're like, wait a second, how does he know we call him Doc does happen? So that's cool.
I can remember when I was a little boy, my grandmother and I could hold conversations entirely without ever opening our mouths. She called it shining.
So this is really close to how it is in the book. Danny is a little more of an open kid. He's not doing this like weird like emo stare thing that he's doing in this movie. He's a little more willing to talk about stuff. But yeah, a lot of those lines, Halloran's lines about him and his grandma, and also it's funny how this conversation happens in the book is actually a little more strange because Halloran is joking when they first meet that he's gonna, take Danny with him to Florida. And then when he's leaving to go, he asks if Danny can help him with his luggage. And they both get into his car and they like have this long conversation sitting in his car. All the while Wendy is looking from the lobby of the hotel going, oh my God, he's really going to take my son. It's like super kind of funny and weird in the book, but this is a little cleaner of a way to get to it.
There ain't nothing in room 237. But you ain't got no business going in there anyway. So stay out.
Yeah, I don't think this is how it went. First off, I think everyone knows it's room 217 in the book, or at least they know it's not room 237 in the book. I think, though, Dick is pretty clear that he should stay away, which he is here, but I think as I recall, I think he tells him there's something in there. I don't think he's as cagey with him, but it's a little hard to remember because there are other times where, like, we're in Dick's head. Another quick thing I want to say is there's a really great scene in the book that they don't do here where Halloran wants to check how strong Danny's shine is. And so he has him just tell him to shoot him a message mentally as hard as he can. And Danny basically just yells, "Hey Dick," to him, and it messes Halloran up. It's like a very strong, like, psychic, it's like mind bullets, right? Psychic shot. Halloran pretty much says, like, you shine, like, stronger than anyone I've ever met. He also tells Danny that the hotel's bad, especially for people like him, and if he ever is really scared and really needs him, to yell out to him for help, and he might be able to hear him from Florida. That's a pretty important thing in the book, and something that does happen in the movie, but they never have the conversation, obviously. So Danny doesn't have a big wheel in the book. He just kind of runs around. Also, one of the things they never don't really talk about in this, but they're pretty broke when they get to the Overlook. Jack has been out of work for quite a while, and they need this job. And that's kind of a big thing. Even when everything starts kind of getting messed up and they kind of want to leave, Jack feels that like they're going to be ruined essentially if they don't have this job. So they probably wouldn't have money for Danny to have a big wheel. But, you know, it's way more fun for Kubrick to shoot this with Danny running around in a big wheel.
Any ideas yet?
Lots of ideas. No good ones.
Well, something will come. It's just a matter of settling back into the habit of writing every day.
Yeah, that's all it is.
It's really nice up here, isn't it?
I love it.
When we first came up here, I thought it was kind of scary.
I fell in love with it right away. When I came up here for my interview, it was as though I'd been here before. I mean, we all have moments of deja vu, but this was ridiculous.
Okay, so I like a lot of what's going on here, but also there is something that needs to be sort of, I think, dealt with. I think that Kubrick's trying to do this sort of like weird kind of reincarnation thing maybe in this movie. It's kind of hard to really pinpoint because everything's really mysterious. But in the book, it's not really anything about I've been here before or anything like that. It's more that the hotel is evil and it's seducing Jack, and it's trying to get Jack to basically be its thrall, all essentially to get Danny, because Danny is like the grand prize, because Danny has such powerful shine, and I guess for whatever reason the Overlook wants his psychic energy. But that being said, like the stuff with him being sort of passive aggressive with Wendy about his writing, like, yep, that's all it is, and I fell in love with the place first time I saw it, that is very in line with the narrative of the book, because the Overlook is sending him good vibes early on. Yeah, so there isn't any of this in the book per se. Actually, Jack spends a lot of his time in the book down in the boiler room. First off, his main job really is making sure the boiler is working and can heat certain sections and doesn't creep up and like explode essentially. So that's his main job, and he spends a lot of time in the boiler room, and he finds this like scrapbook in the boiler room that is about the history of the Overlook, and he gets really obsessed with it and starts thinking like he wants to write a book about the Overlook because it's so fascinating with like mob bosses and celebrities and other kinds of weird stuff going on. And he doesn't know who put the scrapbook there, but he spends a lot of time down there. Really, I don't recall in the book him throwing a ball around a bunch. Though he did snowshoe quite a bit. I do remember that. So Danny is a much more heroic character in the book than he is in the movie. In the book, he keeps on thinking about room 217, what's in there, and he actually he borrows the sort of master key to the hotel and actually ends up going in room 217 and being attacked by that decaying woman in the tub that we see later in the movie that Jack runs into. It's pretty wild and very scary in the book. He also gets attacked by a fire hose. So, yeah, that happens. Why don't you do that one, Kubrick?
Get a lot written today?
Wendy, let me explain something to you. Whenever you come in here and interrupt me, you're breaking my concentration. You're distracting me. And it will then take me time to get back to where I was. When I'm in here, that means that I am working. That means don't come in. How do you think you can handle that?
So this doesn't really happen in the book. I think this is more just to show that he is becoming crazier and crazier. He's pretty verbally abusive to her throughout the book. But once again, in the book, a lot of this is like in his own head. Like he is horrible about her in his own head. He is often calling her names. He thinks that she is trying to pit her son against him. He's often comparing her to her mother that he hates. So it's not verbally as much to her, but we are aware that he is like pretty venomous towards her in the book. But you know, it makes sense to do it this way in a movie where you don't want voiceover. Also, even though we know that he's not really writing anything in the movie, he actually is writing this play. It's funny, it's almost like a writer's joke because he's like writing a play that is essentially about him and about how he screwed up his job by having this kid who was a student that ended up hating him and slashing his tires, and so Jack literally like goes into berserker mode and like beats him up so bad that they fire him from his job. So he's essentially writing a play kind of about that. So he does get some writing done. It's not just all work and no play make Jack a dull boy. Oh, there's the scrapbook. That's the overlooked scrapbook. I did not notice that before. That's interesting. Quarantine 2020.
Hi, how are you folks getting on up there? Over?
Oh, we're just fine. But our telephones don't seem to be doing too well. Are the lines down by any chance?
So that conversation doesn't happen, but the phone lines are down at a certain point, and the radio is the only thing they could use to communicate with the outside world. Yeah, so that scene doesn't happen in the book. Like I said, the little girls aren't really there to terrorize him, but he does see a lot of ghosts, and they get more aggressive as the time goes on because the Overlook is both wanting Danny but also threatened by Danny.
Tony, I'm scared. Remember what Mr. Halloran said. It's just like pictures in a book, Danny. It isn't real.
In the book, when he's talking to Dick Halloran tells him that he'll see things there, he'll see ghosts there, but they can't hurt him, and they're just like pictures in a book, and all you have to do is close your eyes, and when you open them again, they won't be there. And Danny is often asking for Tony's help throughout the book.
Do you like this hotel?
I wish we could stay here forever. Ever.
You would never hurt Mommy or me, would you?
Did your mother ever say that to you? That I would hurt you?
No, Dad.
Okay, so this is cool because they are kind of combining the relative themes of what's going on in the narrative of the book here. None of it is exact. I mean, the thing you got to remember in the book is that Danny has telepathy, and Danny can often hear other people's thoughts. Not always all of them, and sometimes there's moments when Jack's thoughts are hidden from him. He's purposely hiding them. Also, keep in mind, at some point in the book, like, they're kind of both on board with Danny being telepathic because he's pretty earnest with his parents. Like, Wendy, there comes a point where Wendy's like, oh yeah, my kid's an X-Men, essentially, no big deal. Jack is aware that he knows things he shouldn't know, but also he tries to play it off like he just has a wild imagination. And so a lot of this stuff with like, you would never hurt Mommy or me, part of that is just because he can kind of hear Jack's thoughts. He can also hear Wendy's thoughts, because you got to keep in mind, like, Shelley Duvall's playing this really kind of more chipper character who's like concerned about her family. But in the book, man, like, Wendy is constantly fearful that Jack is going to hurt Danny. She's constantly thinking that she needs to leave with Danny, that Jack is drinking again, that he seems like he's drinking again, but she knows he's not. Her mind is constantly like concerned for Danny and worried about Jack being violent. And so, though we're not getting a lot of that, I think that the conversation here is getting us to the same point, which is really cool that they did it that way. I don't remember Jack saying anything out loud like, I wish we could be here forever or anything like that, but he's definitely in love with the hotel, and he definitely wants to spend time at the hotel. I think, once again, this is a little more like his internal mania coming out verbally, so that we are aware of his state of mind.
Mom, are you in there?
Yeah, so this makes probably for better horror movie stuff, having the door open like that with the key in there. But like I said before, in the book, Danny takes the key and he goes in and sees that ghost. Also, this boiler room stuff was totally like, it was Jack's job. So I don't recall Wendy ever doing it.
I dreamed that I killed you and Danny.
He might have had a weird dream like this in the book. I really can't remember, sorry.
Danny! Oh my God. Danny, what happened to your neck?
So this is really cool, and this is, another example of them doing stuff that's from the book, but in a slightly different way. So in the book, he does go into room 217, and the old woman comes out of the tub, and he runs to the door to try to get out, can't open the door, and then she literally closes her hands around his neck and tries to strangle him. And it's a really freaky moment in the book, but he does end up coming out to both of his parents like this with the red marks on his neck and sucking his thumb, because every time he would have some kind of like crazy experience, he would go back to sucking his thumb, because that was sort of his defense mechanism. It's a cool way of doing it without showing a little child attacked by an old naked woman.
You did this to him, didn't you?
Yeah, so that's good. I mean, the thing is that they keep on bringing up throughout the book, him breaking Danny's arm and her constantly worried that he's gonna like hurt Danny more. So
Give anything for a drink. In my damn soul. Just a glass of beer.
I like they said a glass of beer, because I remember one of the things in the book was that the hotel bar just smelled like beer. Like it just reeked of beer from all the years of it being a bar.
Hi, Lloyd. A little slow tonight, isn't it?
Yes, it is, Mr. Torrance.
So this is really cool. So in the book, he does have this conversation with Lloyd initially without Lloyd being there. He's just kind of talking to himself. But then later on, Lloyd is there, I think in another scene. And then they have this almost same conversation.
You slipped me a bottle of bourbon, a little glass, and some ice.
Silly, but I think it was cocktails that he asked him for, like a gin cocktail maybe in the book, and not bourbon. Just,
No, sir. I'm not busy at all.
Good man. You set him up and I'll knock him back, Lloyd. One by one.
A lot of the conversation in this scene is from the book.
Best damn bartender from Timbuktu to Portland, Maine. Or Portland, Oregon, for that matter.
Also what I like about this little wordplay he's doing here is because we spend so much time with Jack in his head in the book, he has a very high opinion of himself. He thinks of himself as a guy who is, going to be publishing giant books. He's going to be very famous. He is just so talented and amazing. He's got a relative sense of entitlement. And so I think like that, that wordplay sort of gets that across.
That bitch. As long as I live, she'll never let me forget what happened.
Yeah, that's about like 30% of his internal monologue throughout the book is that sentiment.
Jack! There's someone else in the hotel with us. There's a crazy woman in one of the rooms. She tried to strangle Danny.
Yeah, so this happens in the book.
Weather forecasters predict more snow.
It's pretty different in the book. So Danny isn't in a trance like that. Danny is like fully lucid, and he yells to Dick psychically, "Dick, please come help. We're in danger." And Dick is actually driving a car like on the freeway in Miami when he gets hit by Danny's like psychic message, and he swerves around. He almost hits a truck, and it's a lot cooler in the book, but at the same time, just logistically speaking, it made more sense both in shooting and editorial, just have them in the bed. It's a lot cheaper, and also there's this kind of nice, like, cutting between the bedroom of the room and also him there, and also Danny in his bedroom, but it is a much different scenario in the book. Okay, so this is different, but it's pretty cool, and I think for a horror movie, this probably works better. Jack does go into room 217 in the book, and he does see the old woman, and she does sort of come after him a little bit, and then he kind of runs off and pretends he didn't see anything. It's not this whole, like, sexy lady seducey thing. But what is kind of neat is in the book later, when he's at the ballroom, he's like drinking and he dances with like a very elegant woman who is in a tight dress that he's pretty sure like she has no underwear on under it. And so there is kind of this like seductory thing going on in the book that I think they kind of combined that part with this part to then have the rug pull of the scare with the old woman, and also showing the old woman kind of come out of the tub is very like it was in the general situation in the book. So I think like though it's not the same, it's a pretty cool way of meshing sort of what is going on in the book with the movie.
Did you find anything?
No, nothing at all.
What about those bruises on his neck?
I think he did it to himself.
Yeah, so that conversation is pretty close in the book. He does say he thinks Danny did it to himself. He denies seeing anything in room 217, 237, whatever at this point. And also, he's pretty angry at Danny, and he keeps on thinking to himself he's going to have to punish him, essentially, for going where he's not supposed to be going. He's seen red rum, and red rum definitely is a big part of the book also.
I think we have to get Danny out of here.
Just leave the hotel?
I could really write my own ticket if I went back to Boulder now, couldn't I? Shoveling out driveways, working a car wash. Did that appeal to you?
Yes, this is cool. This is a combination of some stuff both in his own head and also to her in the book. In the book, he appeases her at first, saying like, oh yeah, I could snowshoe down with Danny. I mean, there's a chance we might not live, but we can do it. And so he's kind of like, being really passive aggressive, but all the stuff about shoveling asphalt and becoming like a loser in his own head, that is stuff straight from his inner monologue in the book. So it's a cool combo of stuff that happened both between characters and also in his own head. So this also becomes a reoccurring theme in the book. So in this haunted house, for lack of a better term, all the time periods are going on at once, but quite often it's the New Year's party. There are like balloons and glitter and other things like that you would have at a party, and actually some of them do physically manifest themselves into the hotel. There's this moment that's not in the movie with the elevators going up and down by itself, and Wendy's like scared of how weird it is, and Jack is just dismissive and being like, it's just a malfunction, it's old, who cares? And then Wendy like literally pulls like a mask and streamers or something from it, and she's like, is this a malfunction? And so the set deck of it all is very much like in line with what happens in the book.
Good evening, Mr. Torrance. Good evening.
So something the book does that's really cool is at first it's like empty in the ballroom, and then like slowly you can kind of see stuff and hear people, and like kind of the ghosts sort of slowly become part of the atmosphere. It's just a choice, and frankly easier to do it like this, and it's cool, so it doesn't really matter, but there is kind of a difference in how they sort of appear to Jack in the book as compared to how this is going, like pretty much full barrel, like they're like solid beings to him already.
Your money's no good here.
That's right.
I'm so sorry, sir.
You're aware of some of the ghosts from the scrapbook of the Overlook, so you're aware of, like, you know, the guy who owned it and a few other ghosts. And one of them is a dude in a dog costume that is kind of like running around, sort of being like a jester in this party. And like they're feeding him alcohol, and it's like really crazy and really visually interesting. I think he's supposed to be the guy in the bear suit or whatever later on, but he is part of this scene in the book. And then later is actually a ghost that is threatening Danny. It's pretty wild.
Grady?
Yes, sir.
Haven't I seen you somewhere before? You were the caretaker here. I recognize you. I saw your picture in the newspapers. You, chopped your wife and daughter up into little bits.
This is close in a lot of ways. He does meet Grady. They have this conversation. It's interesting, though, in the book, the news never really came out about Grady killing his family. I think maybe it was in the local Sidewinder paper, but they were able to, the managers of the hotel were able to successfully keep it out of any big news. And that was kind of one of the things about it, is that this hotel had a lot of secrets that were generally kept out of everyone knowing. You know, it's a shady hotel, but overall, like, people didn't know about it.
You are the caretaker. You've always been the caretaker. I should know, sir. I've always been here. Did you know, Mr. Torrance, that your son is attempting to bring an outside party into this situation? Your son has a very great talent. I don't think you are aware how great it is. But he is attempting to use that very talent against your will.
This is very much like what happens in the book. He does tell him that Danny is calling Halloran to try to get him there. The forces of the hotel do tell him how special Danny is.
It's his mother. She interferes.
Perhaps they need a good talking to. My girls, they didn't care for the Overlook at first. One of them actually stole a pack of matches and tried to burn it down. But I corrected them, sir.
I can't remember if it's the exact same words, but this is all pretty much in line with the conversation, things he said in the book to Jack.
We have the snow cat.
So Wendy was making plans to get out of the Overlook, like even really before the snow started getting really heavy. She was afraid for Danny, and Jack was being weird and all kinds of stuff. In the book, they have a snowmobile, and she asks Jack to check it out and see if it's, you know, still running. Jack goes, and first he thinks that there's no battery for it, and he's like super happy about it because he wants to like live there and he loves the Overlook so much. But then he finds the battery, and then he gets bummed out. He puts it in. He realizes the snowmobile will work and they can get back down. So instead he decides to do an act of sabotage and takes like a spark plug out of it and throws it into the snow so that no one could find it and no one's any the wiser. What's cool about the book is they're consistent in sort of nerfing Danny's powers, because Danny can read a lot of thoughts, and Danny knows that his dad is really proud of himself for doing something, but that he's keeping it hidden from Danny, and he can't understand why somebody would be proud of something but also want to keep it hidden from others. So this whole thing about her wanting to get back down was a pretty consistent thread for quite a bit of the book.
Red rum! Red rum!
Danny, what's the matter, hon?
Danny's gone away, Mrs. Torrance.
Yeah, so Danny would be in like catatonic states. Tony would not be speaking through him to his mom. But you know, it's a pretty cool way of showcasing the journey that Tony takes Danny on without, you know, shooting a bunch of stuff and doing a bunch of weird ghosty montages.
KDK-1, colon, KDK-12. Are you receiving me?
Yeah, so it's moments like this that make me think that Kubrick really respected and really liked Stephen King's book because, you know, he does a really good job of maintaining a lot of the stuff, even though he kind of changed it for his own, you know, narrative needs. Like, in the book, Jack destroys the radio, but he does it in like a kind of dream state, like a walking sleep type thing. Kind of not unlike that sort of weird nightmare he had at the typewriter earlier in the movie. He's sort of in this weird state and he destroys the radio without doing it. And in this, he's doing it maliciously, but the way he's doing it and pulling out the little like parts is actually kind of a lot like he takes care of the snowmobile in the book. So, and I think that Kubrick probably did that intentionally. I don't know, I think it's kind of cool.
Good evening, fire service.
I called a while ago about the folks at the Overlook Hotel.
Oh, yeah. We tried to contact them several times by radio, but they didn't answer. If you'd like me to, I'll be glad to try them again later on.
Oh, that's very nice of you.
That was not their conversation in the book. In the book, he is much more adamant to the guy that, like, there's something going on. There's something wrong up there. And the guy's like, how do you know? And he's like, I just know. You need to get in contact. You need to go up there. And dude's like, hey, man, I got people snowed in. I got people doing this, doing that. And, you know, Dick is, you know, pretty snippy with them. But also it's kind of hard to sell that you got telepathy to a park ranger. So it's a much more tense interchange. Dick is just a much bigger, more important character in the book. And so all of his stuff is way more filled out. Yeah, so now he's already in the plane. I mean, it's so funny. Like, you know, reading the book, especially now as an adult, you know, the thing that really affected me in the book was the journey of Dick Halloran to get to the Overlook. I mean, it's kind of like a big part of the book. You know, he gets the message from Danny while he's in the car. He has to go to his boss and tell him he needs time off. And he does this lie about how his son is in the hospital. He needs to go see him. He calls to get like an airplane ticket and he's on his way there and he's speeding and he almost gets there, but then a cop pulls him over and so he misses his flight. And there's like this whole thing of like this journey with all these Herculean things that Dick is trying to do just to get to Danny. And it's really cool because you're like rooting for this guy so much. There's so much tension because you know Danny's in such a bad position in the Overlook with both the hotel out to get him and his father, you know, completely unraveling. They can't do that much in this movie, but we get a little taste of it here. So there's like a whole thing in the plane. There's like a lot of turbulence and so they're all shaking around and like people are like, we're gonna die up here. But also I don't know if it's this lady, but Kubrick put a lady there right next to him. There was a lady that he was right next to in the book. She was kind of this lady who was talking a lot about the CIA lying to us and stuff, you know. But what was interesting about her is she had the shine. They made it pretty clear that she also had the shining. Basically in the book they talk about how like a lot of people have the shining. It's just to different extents, you know, like Danny is like Super Saiyan shining and Dick is like, you know, got a really decent level of shine. And I think he said like all mothers have a little bit of shine in them. But there's at least I think 2 other characters in the book that Dick runs into that have some lower version of the shining. Also, I'd just like to state that he got a rad first class ticket because somebody didn't go there, so he was flying in much more style than this coach situation, but it's all good.
Hi, Larry. This is Dick Halloran. I just got in from Miami, and I got to get up to the Overlook today. That means I'm going to need a snowcat to get up there, Larry.
What's the big deal about getting up there today?
We got a very serious problem with the people who are taking care of the place. And I'm supposed to go up there and find out if they have to be replaced.
Yeah, so this is really different, but I think for the sake of efficiency for a film, it makes total sense how they did this. But basically, in the book, Dick drives for like 5 hours from Boulder to Sidewinder, and he goes off the road before he even gets to Sidewinder, and some plowman finds him and essentially like saves him and then tells him, well, if you're going to go to Sidewinder, try to get up there, talk to this guy who's my buddy who can get you a snowmobile. But Dick Hallorann doesn't really know a lot of people in Sidewinder, you know what I mean? Like, he goes up there to work at the Overlook, and then he comes, and then he goes home, or he goes somewhere else, you know? So I think for the sake of efficiency, this scene works really well. And he also doesn't have to keep on not explaining to people that he knows there's danger, and he can't explain his telepathy. But this scene never happened, and this is just a very truncated way to get him, you know, up there.
Your bad day out there. What you call your heavy snows. They're just not prepared. The storm will continue throughout the day in the National Weather Service.
Yeah, that was kind of cool. You know, in the book, he's on the freeway and he's near Sidewinder exit, but there's I think it's a truck, is tipped over sort of like that. And so he actually has to go like 30 miles out of his way in order to get there, just to kind of add like, you know, the speed thing of like just another problem. But, you know, that little thing there was kind of cool. It was a kind of a nod, I think, to the book. Just step aside or you might end up in a... Gotta be honest, you know, this was the 80s. Just parents just smoking full packs of cigarettes right next to their kids.
I'm just gonna go and talk to Daddy for a few minutes.
Yes, Mrs. Torrance.
You know, I wouldn't be surprised if one of the things that Stephen King didn't like in this movie was the portrayal of Danny by the actor. You know, first off, you have to give kid actors like tons of latitude because it's hard to act already. And when you're a little kid, it's, you know, even harder. But, you know, the thing about Danny is he's like very much, once again, like he's this kind of like very heroic character. He has a really positive attitude through a lot of the terrible things that are going on. He is haunted, but he seems to have like a stiff upper lip about a lot of stuff. And, you know, the way this actor is playing it, he's much more haunted, you know? And I think it works for the movie, but Danny is, I would say, of all the characters, Danny feels the most different in this movie as compared to the book. And I would also say Jack is very close. Jack is like very, very close to how he's portrayed in the book. So it's pretty minor, but at this point in the book where Jack is acting super wacky and Wendy's really worried about him, she's carrying around a kitchen knife, a big old kitchen knife she got from the kitchen, and not a baseball bat. So this is super iconic, really great, doesn't happen in the book at all, but, you know, it's a really cool way of just making it very clear to the audience the man has lost his damn mind, and make it very clear to her that he's lost his damn mind, but this is not part of the book.
What do you want to talk about? Maybe it was about Danny.
Yeah, see, this is cool. I don't remember this from the movie, but yeah, no, it's very clear Danny can hear what is happening, and that he's essentially hearing the thoughts, which are the actual words of his parents. But yeah, it's funny. I don't remember this in the movie, but this is very clearly sort of going along with Danny's clairvoyant / telepathic abilities.
Does it matter to you at all that the owners have placed their complete confidence and trust in me, and that I have signed a letter of agreement, a contract, in which I have accepted that responsibility?
You know, this is cool. I think, you know, you're just hearing him from the movie perspective, and he's just, you know, crazy. But if you read the book, the ghosts are basically telling Jack if he can take care of his family, if he can give the Overlook Danny, then he will prove that he's managerial material, you know, and it's sort of seducing him with this idea that he's going to be this big part of the Overlook. And at that point, Jack is like pretty nutty, so he's like, that seems like a great idea. So I think that stuff about like his employers and like, you know, have you ever thought about, you know, the agreements I made and stuff? I think if you read the book, I think it has a little more to do with that than the reality of things. But it's cool because it works also just in the movie sense of that he's just crazy.
I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm just gonna bash your brains.
Cool. So this is definitely different in the book. This is more exciting, probably. In the book, they're in the ballroom, I believe, and I think Jack basically grabs Wendy and is trying to strangle her to death. And as I recall, and I'm sorry, I don't exactly remember. I think Danny whacks him with something, and they knock him out. So it's a little more of a family affair in this scene, but she doesn't hit him with a bat. He doesn't tumble downstairs or anything like that. But yeah, this is cool because this does happen in the book. After he's whacked on the head, after he attacks him, she and Danny drag him into this, locked food storage area. It's really interesting because she does all the dragging, but Danny's trying to grab his arms and keep his arms sort of, across his chest just to make it easier to move him around. Yeah, that also happens too in the book where she doesn't realize she hasn't released that bolt and is trying, and it's Danny in the book that's like, yo, Mom, let's get this,
Hey, wait a minute. What are you doing?
Yeah, he does grab her, as I recall, in the book, and it's a much more suspenseful moment because he has her for a second, and then I can't remember exactly how she gets out. Open the door! There's her kitchen knife. Yep, that's the thing she's carrying around most of the book.
You got a big surprise coming to you. You're not going anywhere. Go check out the snowcat in the radio and you'll see what I mean. Go check it out!
Yeah, like I said, this kind of went different. He's more just kind of threatening her while he's in there, and she sort of knows about the radio and the snowmobile already at this point, but I will say Jack Nicholson's acting in this movie, the little things he does make the character Jack Torrance much more interesting than he is in the book. He's just a very unlikable character in the book, and I think that the little eccentric stuff that Jack Nicholson does actually makes him weirdly playful, where he does not come off that way at all in the book. I actually really love that he's got Oreos and crackers and stuff next to him, because in the book there's this scene where he's sitting in there and I believe he's eating Wheat Thins, maybe? It's either Wheat Thins or Triscuits, I can't remember, but he's just sort of sitting there angrily eating them, and it's just to get as much energy as possible so he can go out there and kill his family essentially. But I just remember it being a really funny image in the book. And there's a little bit of that here.
I and others have come to believe that your heart is not in this, that you haven't the belly for it.
Yeah, these lines are right from the book.
Your wife appears to be stronger than we imagined, Mr. Torrance, somewhat more resourceful.
I also believe those were pretty much exact lines from the book. Yeah, and that happens in the book. I mean, he has this conversation with Grady and is almost the same dia, and then they let him out of that locked room. So that's very much what happens in the book. Yeah, I mean, it's so much more practical to have the snowcat and have Scatman Crothers in this, snowcat, because it's essentially a car, but in the book, he's on a snowmobile, zipping around the mountains. Also would be the moment to talk about this crazy scene in the book that they certainly do not do in the movie. Remember I talked about those topiary animals way earlier ago? Yeah, so the topiary animals are constantly kind of, sneaking up on people, kind of like the angels from Doctor Who. And they start attacking at the end, and literally as Dick is trying to get there on a snowmobile, I think it was one of the lions, or was it the dog? I don't know. It was one of them show up on the road and straight up attack him, and he has to do battle with a topiary animal. And it's pretty cool. It's really wild. It was so uncanny even reading it. It's very clear why they didn't do it, for not only budgetary reasons, but I think it's just a little too far apart of reality somehow, even though I know this is all weird mystical fiction anyway. But I could see someone like J.J. Abrams or somebody remaking this movie, and it being a big part of it is the evil CGI foliage monsters. Yeah, this stuff with Danny and a knife walking around doesn't happen, but, it's cool, scary horror movie stuff. I can't remember if this happens or not in the book. I mean, he says red rum a lot, and I know red rum is revealed in his sort of Tony's dream state to him. I don't recall if he writes it on the wall, though, and someone sees it in a mirror. Okay, so this is one of the biggest differences, and I think a lot of people know this already. He does not attack his family with an axe in the book. It's actually a roquet mallet. I know it seems like it should be croquet, but it's not. And they actually say that it's a different thing in the book. It's a roquet mallet. And it's interesting because when I first remember hearing about that and watching the old Shining miniseries that obviously comes after this, I remember being like, oh, mallet's lame, that's not scary. But what's crazy is that when you think about it, you hit someone with an axe, they're kind of dead, right? But you can beat somebody with a roquet mallet quite a bit, and that kind of happens in this book. Some people get really messed up with Jack just beating them with this mallet. So in a way, it's kind of like suspenseful speaking, way scarier. But an axe is so much more effective in a visual storytelling sense. Oh yeah, so one cool thing about this scenario in the book is that by the time this happens where Jack is knocking down the door, Danny's not actually in the apartment. Wendy thinks he's in the apartment, but he's not. Tony took him somewhere else. And so she thinks he's in there and she's searching for him because she assumes that he is hiding while this is going on. But in fact, Danny is not in this actual scene, this proximity scene in the book.
Little pigs, let me come in.
I don't recall him saying this stuff. Maybe some of the ranting were this little piggy stuff. I will say he spent a lot of time yelling about how his wife and Danny were going to take their medicine. And that's really interesting too, because something they don't go into at all in the movie. Jack has an abusive father in his past. When he was a child, his father was incredibly abusive, especially to Jack's mother. And his father, when he would beat his mother, would say, "You're going to take your medicine." And that sort of became this running thing that once Jack sort of took on this mantle of, a maniac trying to kill his family, he would scream that as he's running around the Overlook with a roquet mallet.
Here's Johnny!
Doesn't say in the book, but it's really cool, so it's okay. Yeah, so this does happen in the book. He breaks down at least one of the doors using a roquet mallet, and Wendy does slice his hand with a knife. This also happens too. They both hear Halloran coming in on a snowmobile, and they sort of all stop and listen, and that's what causes Jack to run off. And that's the thing, Stephen King is really good at staging suspense in general, and that's why a lot of this stuff actually does match up pretty closely in a lot of ways to the book.
Hello?
Okay, so this is a big departure from the book. In the book, like I said before, Jack is running around with a roquet mallet, not a axe, and so he does attack Dick. He actually hits him in the face with a roquet mallet and breaks half the teeth in his face and beats him up really badly, but alas, he does not kill Dick Halloran in the book. Dick actually does survive the book, unlike this moment where he gets sort of axed in the heart pretty unceremoniously without really being able to help at all. So that is definitely a huge difference. Pretty sure that already in the timing of this book, Wendy has been viciously attacked by Jack with a roquet mallet, and he beat her really bad with it. I think he broke he might have broken her neck or something. It was a pretty vicious beating. And she kind of, there's this like really climactic scene where she's trying to drag herself back to their little apartment just so she can save Danny. If it hadn't already happened at the time, it probably would have happened around here. But once again, like a giant departure from what happens in this movie. And also one of the other many reasons why you go with a roquet mallet instead of an axe, because, you know, she would have been chopped up into little bits. Had it been an axe in the book. I think that Wendy's a pretty good character in this movie. And I think Shelley Duvall does a great job, but I also think that Wendy's a much more interesting character in the book, mostly because she kind of like comes into her own a little as a character. You know, she starts off as this sort of abused wife in a way, and she's worried about her son, but she doesn't know what to do. She's got these mommy issues that they go into, and then she realizes things are going wrong, and then kind of by the end she sort of definitely takes this sort of protective turn, and, you know, gets a little more actiony, and is just kind of turns, and she evolves as a character. She has a really nice arc in the book that doesn't really have. She's a little more reactionary in the movie. It is what it is. It's the choice they made. I think the movie kind of keeps everyone as vulnerable as possible, frankly, to make Jack scarier, which, you know, I understand from the viewpoint of a horror movie, but definitely she's a much more, I think, interesting character in a lot of ways in the book. Haha, yeah, there he is. That's the dog character. Yeah. I mean, that might be a bear costume. I'm not really sure, but that's definitely a call to the character in the dog costume in the book. And I love that there's this weird, like, sexual connotation to this here, which there's a bit of a submissive, dominant thing going on with the guy who owns the Overlook and the dude in the dog costume, and I think that's what they're alluding to here. And I wish I could remember, and I apologize I can't. I don't remember if Wendy sees ghosts or not during this chaotic period. You know, the climax of the book is pretty chaotic. For sure, Danny sees all the ghosts, and obviously Jack also ends up seeing them. I don't remember if Wendy does or not, but this all works in showcasing all these ghosts that we haven't seen. Yeah, so this is another huge departure from the book and the movie. So all of the sort of climactic stuff between Danny and Jack happen inside the Overlook. They don't go outside. There is no hedge maze, so this sort of like cat and mouse game in the hedge maze never happens. What I like about this scene is it showcases that Danny's smart and crafty, because that is kind of a big part of the character, and there's elements of that in the book about Danny just being a little smarter than the Overlook. Also, another thing that we don't really get in the movie that Stephen King makes pretty apparent by the end of the book is that the Overlook has taken control of Jack. Jack isn't really Jack anymore. The spirit of the Overlook, the evil of the Overlook, has overtaken him. Jack is essentially just like a vessel for the Overlook, kind of like what they would do in like Supernatural when like a demon would take over somebody. They don't really go into that because it's complicated, but that does play a pretty big part in the ultimate climax between Danny and Jack in the book. Yeah, so in the book, Wendy does find Halloran, but when she runs up to him, he is still alive. I think he's unconscious, but he is still alive, and she sort of gathers him, and they're sort of like, where's Danny? And this is like all in the middle while Danny and Jack are having their sort of like climactic final moments. Yeah, no, this is not something that happens in the book at all. This is just, I don't know, Pirates of the Caribbean, I guess. I would say even for Kubrick, man, that was pretty schlocky. I gotta admit, that's probably the... I feel like I selectively forgot that moment because it's like not good. I feel like Warner Brothers like shot that extra and they're like, let's chuck this in without him noticing. No, but honestly, how does it make any sense? I mean, like, the Overlook's clean, and then we're seeing ghosts that are live animated. How does the cobwebs and the skeletons make any sense? Like, we get it already. Also, seeing them like covered in blood and all weird, It's much more interesting than as skeletons in like some dungeon from Skyrim. Anyway, whatever. It doesn't matter. Kubrick's a genius. I am sorry to inform you there are no bleeding elevator doors in Stephen King's novel. Okay, this is so different. So the book is really cool in that there is this moment where Danny gets trapped by Jack, and Jack is right about to crack his head open with a roquet mallet. And at this point, Danny has sort of found his strength, isn't afraid anymore, and has kind of come into his own powers in a weird way. And Danny tells Jack, "You're not my daddy. I know you're the hotel. Take your mask off." And at that point, Jack's like, "Oh, well, I guess there's no need for disguises anymore." And it's insane because then the Overlook, which is taking over Jack's body, takes the roquet mallet and bashes Jack's face in. So he's like this bloody, like, gross mess of a face at that point because it's like the true face of the hotel. It's really cool. It's shocking. The book kind of goes a long way after a while to kind of let you know that like Jack is not a good dude, but Jack probably wasn't going to try to kill his family had he not gone to the Overlook. But also on top of that, when all that happens in the climax, Danny's like, "You think you're so smart, but you don't remember the thing my daddy forgot." And that is the fact that the boiler room is a big part of the book, and the fact that it creeps, and that Jack is there primarily to make sure the boiler doesn't creep too much and get too hot. Well, during all this chaos in the book, it does get too hot, and so at the end, Danny he lets the Overlook know, like, "You're about to blow up," and he's like, "No," and he goes and runs to try to stop it, and Danny runs, collects his mom and Holleran, and they literally like get out of the hotel right as like it explodes, and they like kind of leap off, from the fireball like a big Hollywood movie, which is ironic because this is a big Hollywood movie and Kubrick doesn't do this, I think, for budgetary reasons and many other reasons. And so the ending's dramatically different in the book. I will say what I like about this ending that Kubrick has made is that we still get the sense that Danny's very smart, and it's really like thrilling to watch them run around this maze. And I think that a giant explosion for this movie wouldn't have felt right, because this movie is a very kind of slow burn, really elegant movie, and a big explosion would have felt kind of off. And they didn't want to spend a bunch of time with the boiler room, which makes sense. But it is incredibly different. The twists. I think this one shot is one of the things that makes this movie a classic. It's the little thing at the end, and you're like, what? I think this could be read a few different ways. I think Kubrick set up the groundwork for the fact that he's some version of like a reincarnated soul. Or just simply he is now part of the Overlook, of the many ghosts in the Overlook. This is not really part of the book. In the book, basically, it's just that the Overlook's evil. The Overlook seduces people to do bad things. And also, by the end of the book, the Overlook has exploded, so you wouldn't have this. But you know what? It's iconic. It's cool. Take for what you will, but definitely not part of the book. There is an epilogue in the book after this is over, after the Overlook explodes, where it takes place a few months later. Danny and Wendy and Holleran are all sort of living together in Florida. Wendy's recuperating from the damage that Jack did to her with a roquet mallet. Holleran has this really great conversation with Danny that they actually do in the movie Dr. Sleep, weirdly enough. That's really nice, about sort of, life is tough, but you're gonna make it through, Doc. Danny and Wendy are making plans to go move, and Wendy got a new job, and it's just a nice little epilogue to make sure everyone's okay that you care about in the book. Obviously something they didn't want to go into because this movie is primarily focused on Jack and the Overlook. Because it's a horror movie and you got to focus on the monster, right? I think that there are a lot of differences I didn't even bother going into, mostly because, like, if it wasn't really reflected at all in the movie, then, you know, why really bring it up, you know? But there's a whole lot that goes on in The Shining that isn't even in The Overlook. There's a lot that goes on with Jack and Danny's character, especially Danny's character, Dick Halloran's character, that is just, like, a lot more expansive and really interesting. I would say that if you like The Shining, the movie, the book is definitely worthwhile. Even if you watch this whole thing, I didn't even give away, like, so much that it still wouldn't be an extremely enjoyable experience. I think you can watch this and still read the book and be really enthralled with it, because there's enough difference that it feels like its own thing, but also it's very similar. I'm actually really surprised watching it again. When reading the book, I was like, oh, this is so different. It's crazy. No wonder, you know, Keen hated Kubrick's version. But watching it again, a lot of it's very much the same. You know, there's some big differences, but a lot of the stuff, a lot of the dialogue, a lot of the plot points are just directly from the book. I think they're both really great. I don't think one is better than the other, and they're both worthwhile. So yeah, thanks for watching this, and you know, read more.